The moon hung low in the sky, casting a cold, pale light across the castle walls, where shadows lingered in every corner. Amidst this quiet stillness, Aldric moved through the empty halls, his footsteps soft yet purposeful. Known as the King's Shadow, he had long been trusted with the most perilous of secrets, bearing burdens that would cripple ordinary men. But tonight, his burden felt heavier than ever before. The king, frail and nearing his last breath, had entrusted Aldric with a final command, a truth so dangerous it could unravel the kingdom itself. And now, whispers of rebellion echoed through the northern territories, threatening to seize the throne before the king's heart had even ceased to beat. To Aldric, this mission was not merely a duty. It was a test of loyalty and honor. He had sworn an oath, and though the weight of it threatened to crush him, he knew he could not fail. For in his hands lay the future of the kingdom, a fate bound to secrets that, once revealed, could bring peace or ruin. As he passed a dimly lit corridor, a familiar face emerged from the shadows. It was Sir Gareth, a knight whose gaze held both ambition and contempt. Gareth stepped forward, his voice laced with a sinister curiosity. "Strange times, aren't they, Aldric? A king on his deathbed, and a shadow guarding secrets worth dying for." Aldric met Gareth's gaze, unflinching. "The king's business is not for you to question, Gareth." But Gareth only chuckled, his eyes gleaming with hidden intent. "Be careful, Aldric. Shadows may protect, but they also conceal, dangerously so." Ignoring Gareth's warning, Aldric moved past him, determined to fulfill the vow he had made to his king. Yet in his heart, he knew the night ahead would bring a challenge far greater than any he had faced before. And as he continued through the dark corridors, he could feel the weight of that final command pressing upon him, a reminder that loyalty often demanded the greatest sacrifice. With one last glance at the flickering torches lining the hall, Aldric stepped into the silence of the king's chambers, knowing that his journey had only just begun. In a realm carved by mountains and rivers as ancient as the stars, there lived a man known as Aldric, the King's Shadow. Aldric was not a knight of glittering armor, nor a lord who wielded lands and wealth. He was a quiet, unassuming figure, cloaked in mystery and bound by duty alone. His life was shaped by a simple, solemn oath: to be the protector of the king's most dangerous secrets. For Aldric, loyalty was not merely a virtue, but his very existence. On a crisp autumn eve, as a somber dusk settled over the castle, a young page burst into Aldric's quarters, breathless, his face pale with urgency. "Sir Aldric," he stammered. "The king, he calls for you?" Aldric's pulse quickened. The king's health had been failing, and the whispered prayers of those close to the throne had grown desperate. Without hesitation, he rose, adjusting the dagger hidden within his cloak, a reminder that shadows held the sharpest weapons. Entering the royal chamber, Aldric found the king lying among thick blankets, his once proud face etched with the shadows of impending death. The royal physician had stepped back, signaling Aldric to approach the bedside alone. The silence was heavy, yet the king's eyes, those piercing, aged eyes, still held the fire of a ruler unwilling to be defeated by mortal illness. "Aldric," the king murmured, his voice barely a whisper, "I have a final task for you, a secret that must be kept safe until the day I am gone." He clutched at Aldric's arm with frail fingers, yet his grip held the strength of urgency. "This secret, it could bring down kingdoms. Promise me, Aldric, that you will protect it, even at the cost of your life." Aldric knelt, placing his hand over his heart, and replied with unwavering resolve, "I swear upon my soul, my king. Your secret shall be kept as long as I draw breath." His words were more than a promise. They were a binding vow. Yet, even as the oath left his lips, Aldric could feel a foreboding weight settling upon him, a sense that this task would demand more than even he could foresee. But the king, satisfied, released his grip and in a whisper told Aldric the fateful secret. It was a truth so perilous, so entangled in the politics and bloodlines of kingdoms, that Aldric's own heart faltered. As the candlelight flickered, casting wavering shadows over the king's face, Aldric rose. With a last glance at the man he had served faithfully for decades, he left the chamber. Outside, he walked through the deserted corridors, his mind turning over the secret like a blade glinting in darkness. What had he just vowed to protect? But his thoughts were interrupted as he passed a corner, where two figures in the royal livery stood, exchanging whispers. One of them, a knight by the name of Sir Gareth, eyed Aldric as he passed. There was a strange gleam in his gaze, one Aldric had never trusted. Sir Gareth had always lingered too close to shadows, and his ambition had earned him both admirers and enemies. "Leaving the king's chambers late, aren't we, Aldric?" Sir Gareth said, his tone carefully neutral yet sharp. Aldric halted, sensing the veiled challenge. "The king's business is his alone," he replied, his voice steady. Sir Gareth merely chuckled, though there was no warmth in it. "Indeed, but remember, shadows don't always remain hidden, even for the king's most loyal." Ignoring Gareth's parting words, Aldric strode away, yet unease simmered within him. This vow, this last task, felt like a heavy cloak draped upon his shoulders, one that concealed not only the king's secrets, but perhaps Aldric's own future. As he returned to his quarters, he looked out over the starlit kingdom. The night was still, but Aldric knew that the dawn would bring new threats, hidden beneath the cloak of duty and oaths. Yet even Aldric could not foresee that in the shadows lurked those willing to kill for the knowledge he now bore. But how far would he go to protect his king's final secret, knowing it could destroy everything he held dear? The dawn arrived, pale and cold, casting a gray light over the castle walls. Aldric rose early, his mind still entangled in the implications of the king's secret. As he strapped his dagger to his side, he recalled the words whispered to him in that dim chamber, words that could ignite wars and topple kingdoms if they ever slipped from his lips. The air was heavy with silence as Aldric descended the stone steps to the lower halls. Only a few servants moved about, and each one cast him a wary glance before hurrying off. Even among the castle's denizens, Aldric was a figure both respected and feared. Known as the King's Shadow, few dared speak his name, let alone cross his path. Yet this morning, something was amiss. A tension seemed to hang over the halls, like a storm waiting to break. Reaching the main courtyard, he spotted a gathering of soldiers murmuring in hushed tones. Their faces bore an unmistakable worry, and their hands clutched weapons tightly, as if expecting an attack. "What news?" Aldric asked, his tone calm yet commanding. A young guard, his face pale, stepped forward. "It's the northern border, sir," he stammered. "There are whispers of unrest, rebels rising in arms. Some say they were waiting for the king to weaken." Aldric's jaw clenched. This was no ordinary threat. He knew that in the north, a faction loyal to a former rival of the king had long lingered, waiting for a moment of weakness to challenge the throne. It was dangerous timing, yet Aldric knew that defending the realm required action beyond secrecy. Without another word, he turned on his heel, intent on gathering information. He slipped down the winding passages, disappearing into the hidden alleys of the city surrounding the castle. These were places where the whispers of the realm flowed freely, far from the earshot of nobles or guards. In a shadowed corner of a bustling market, he met with a contact, a tavern owner named Roderick, known for being able to ferret out information in every corner of the kingdom. As Aldric entered, Roderick looked up from his cleaning, a glint of recognition in his eyes. "Aldric." Roderick greeted him with a sly smile, lowering his voice. "Word is, the north is stirring." "More than usual," Aldric nodded, waiting. "They've been whispering about it for weeks now. They think the king is on his last days, and that soon the throne will be empty." Roderick paused, his expression grave. "But it's more than just rebellion. They're after something valuable." "What are they looking for?" Aldric asked, though in his heart, he suspected he already knew. Roderick leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. They say a royal secret, a truth that would shake the foundation of the kingdom. They're looking for someone who knows it. Aldric's blood turned cold. There was only one man who bore that knowledge, himself. Roderick's eyes studied Aldric's face with a trace of pity. They'll come for you, Aldric. They know where the king's secrets lie. For the first time, Aldric felt the weight of his vow pressing upon him, not just as a responsibility, but as a mortal danger. The secret entrusted to him could mean his death, for there were those who would stop at nothing to tear the truth from his mind. Yet, he had sworn to guard it, and guard it he would, even if it cost him everything. He turned back to the castle, the realization setting in with chilling finality. He could trust no one, not even those closest to him. As days passed, Aldric grew increasingly wary. His every step was followed by whispers, and the usual murmur of castle life became tense with an undercurrent of unease. The once familiar faces now looked at him with suspicion, and he sensed that those who knew of his role as the king's shadow were beginning to speculate about the nature of his knowledge. One evening, as Aldric walked through the outer halls, he encountered Sir Gareth again. The knight's eyes gleamed with a hint of malice as he spoke. "It seems even shadows grow restless in these troubled times," Gareth said, his voice laced with insinuation. Aldric met his gaze with a calm, unyielding stare. "Loyalty to the crown is my only concern, Gareth. Not speculation." Gareth smirked unfazed. "But is it truly? I hear the king entrusted you with a task. And now, the northern rebels speak of a secret. Perhaps the two are not unrelated." Aldric felt the ground shift beneath him. Gareth's probing words held a threat, veiled but undeniable. "I would be careful, Gareth," Aldric said quietly. "Rumors are a poor guide in times like these." Gareth's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, assessing stare. "The king's days are numbered, Aldric. And when he passes, there will be a reckoning for those who hold his secrets. Beware your own loyalty. It might just lead you to ruin." With that, Gareth walked away, leaving Aldric standing alone, his fists clenched. He knew he could not let Gareth or anyone else near the truth. But if the rebellion gathered strength and Gareth continued his veiled threats, his task would become nearly impossible. As night fell, Aldric returned to his quarters, feeling the full weight of the king's final request. He knew he would need allies, and quickly, if he was to protect the secret and survive the days to come. Little did Aldric know that Gareth had already set a plan in motion, one that would force Aldric to choose between his vow and his life. But who could he trust, when even shadows held secrets of their own? The weeks that followed were restless, as Aldric felt Gareth's shadow grow darker, more invasive, looming at every corner. Gareth had rallied a band of loyalists, soldiers, and knights whose allegiance shifted with the winds of power. Whispers of rebellion grew louder, stirring in the northern provinces and slipping through the castle like an unwelcome chill. Aldric realized that he could no longer stand alone. He would need to ally himself with those still loyal to the king and the kingdom. There was only one person who came to mind, someone as skilled in subterfuge as she was in loyalty: Lady Seraphine. She was a skilled healer, and more importantly, a trusted confidant of the king. If there was anyone who could assist Aldric without betrayal, it was her. However, gaining her support was no small matter. Lady Seraphine kept her own counsel and moved like a ghost through the castle, elusive in her loyalty. One evening, Aldric sent a discreet message to Lady Seraphine, requesting a midnight meeting in the castle's herb garden. As the moon bathed the courtyard in silvery light, Aldric paced between the rows of heather and rosemary, his mind a tangle of plans and precautions. A faint rustling caught his attention, and from the shadows stepped Lady Seraphine, her eyes gleaming like dark embers under her hood. Her expression was one of wary curiosity, though a soft smile tugged at her lips. "Aldric," she greeted, her voice barely a whisper. "It's rare for the king's shadow to seek company. What troubles you so deeply that you risk summoning me here?" Aldric took a breath, choosing his words with care. "Lady Seraphine, you are one of the king's most trusted, one who knows his heart better than most. There are forces stirring against him, and against what he holds most dear. I have reason to believe that Sir Gareth and others are closing in on something that should remain hidden." Seraphine's brow furrowed, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "You speak of the king's final command, don't you?" she murmured. Aldric nodded, a chill creeping down his spine as he realized she might know more than he had anticipated. "Yes," he replied softly. "It is a truth that could ignite war, topple crowns, and end all the peace he fought so hard to build. If Gareth or the rebels learn of it, it could doom us all." For a long moment, she was silent, her gaze distant. Then, she turned her eyes back to him, her face solemn. "I will aid you, Aldric, but you must understand, even secrets that sleep in the dark have the power to destroy. We must tread carefully, for every move we make draws us closer to peril." Aldric nodded, the weight of her words settling upon him like a heavy cloak. Together, they agreed upon a plan to thwart Gareth's growing influence. Seraphine would use her network of informants to monitor Gareth's movements, while Aldric would gather intelligence on the rebels who stirred in the north, hoping to find the root of their sudden rise in power. Over the following days, Seraphine's informants fed Aldric with valuable insights. Gareth had been meeting secretly with emissaries from the north, men of fierce loyalty to a former duke who had been exiled years before. The duke, Aldric realized, was behind the rising rebellion, and Gareth had aligned himself with this dangerous cause. Late one evening, as Aldric was returning to his quarters, he was met by one of Seraphine's informants, a young stable boy named Finn, who had slipped Aldric messages over the past week. This time, Finn's face was pale with fright, and he looked over his shoulder nervously as he approached. "Sir Aldric," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I've heard something terrible. Gareth has set a trap. He's planning to capture you and bring you before the rebels." Aldric's heart hammered in his chest, though his expression remained calm. "Where is he now, Finn?" "He's gathering men in the northern wing, preparing to leave with them at dawn," Finn replied, his eyes wide with fear. "He knows you hold something powerful, and he won't stop until he has it." Aldric placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You've done well, Finn. Now go back and speak of this to no one." As Finn vanished into the shadows, Aldric felt the cold realization that he was out of time. Gareth would come for him, and soon. But Aldric was no stranger to traps, and he knew that if he was to escape, he would need to act swiftly and decisively. In the dead of night, Aldric gathered his few belongings, including the sealed letter that held the king's secret. He glanced around his quarters one last time, knowing that if he failed, he would never return. With careful steps, he navigated the castle's winding passages, heading for an exit used only by the king's closest aides. But as he reached the courtyard, a figure stepped out from behind a pillar. "Gareth. So, the king's shadow thinks he can slip away?" Gareth's voice was laced with mockery, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. Behind him stood half a dozen men, all bearing the insignia of Gareth's order. "Did you truly think I wouldn't watch you, Aldric? The king's final command, whatever it may be, will die with him, and you'll be the one to deliver it." Aldric's hand instinctively went to the dagger at his belt, his mind racing through possible escapes. But Gareth's men closed in, their swords drawn. "You can kill me, Gareth," Aldric said, his voice calm, "but you'll never know the king's secret. That knowledge is mine alone." Gareth's eyes narrowed, frustration flashing across his face. "Then I suppose we'll have to make you talk." With a sharp nod, Gareth signaled his men forward, and they lunged, weapons gleaming in the moonlight. Aldric's instincts took over, and he moved with a deadly grace honed from years in the shadows. He parried, sidestepped, and struck back, a silent warrior fighting for his king, his honor, and the truth he guarded with his life. One by one, the men fell, until only Gareth remained. Breathing heavily, Aldric faced him, his dagger steady, his gaze unwavering. But Gareth only sneered. "Kill me, and they'll send others. The north will rise. The kingdom is already crumbling. You are but one man, Aldric. You cannot hold back an entire rebellion." Aldric's gaze hardened, and he stepped forward. "Perhaps I am only one man, but one man who knows the truth can hold the power of 1,000. Gareth raised his sword, but Aldric was quicker, his blade finding its mark. Gareth staggered back, his hand clutching his side, blood seeping through his fingers. With a final look of hatred, he sank to the ground, defeated. As Gareth's last breath faded into the night, Aldric stood alone, a solitary figure in the shadows of the castle walls. The king's secret was safe for now. Yet even as dawn approached, Aldric knew that this was only the beginning. The rebellion in the north was rising, and Gareth's death would bring only a temporary reprieve. The king's secret still lay heavy upon him, a burden that would demand sacrifices he could scarcely imagine. The morning sun cast its first rays over the castle walls, but Aldric found no peace in the dawn. Gareth was dead, but his final words echoed in Aldric's mind. The north will rise. Gareth had been a harbinger, not the threat itself. Aldric knew that, even now, rebels in the north would be stirring, preparing for a war built on whispers and secrets. Returning to his quarters, he barely had a moment to rest when a sharp knock sounded at the door. Aldric's hand went instinctively to his dagger before he opened it, finding Lady Seraphine standing there, her face pale and drawn. "The news of Gareth's death has spread," she whispered, casting a furtive glance down the hall. "There are some who believe you acted out of ambition, that you wish to wield the king's power yourself." Aldric's expression darkened. "They misunderstand. I would give anything to rid myself of this burden." Seraphine nodded, but her gaze was somber. "Rumors grow quickly, Aldric. Even now, men speak of rallying under a new banner in the north. The rebellion gathers strength, and without Gareth to satisfy their thirst for revenge, they will turn to you as their enemy." He closed his eyes, the weight of his task pressing upon him. "Then we must reach the king," he said. "While he yet breathes, he can still act. If the rebels know I serve only him, perhaps they will hesitate." But Seraphine shook her head, her gaze filled with regret. "The king is gravely ill, Aldric. He may not survive the week, and if he goes to his grave, the kingdom will be left vulnerable, and the secret you hold will be all that stands between peace and ruin." The truth was unyielding, a shadow that bound him as firmly as any chain. "Then I must leave," Aldric murmured. "I must go north and face the rebellion before it grows beyond control. I will meet them in their own lands, far from the castle walls." Seraphine's eyes widened. "That is a death sentence, Aldric. You cannot face them alone." But Aldric's resolve was ironclad. "If I do not go, they will come for the castle, and they will come for you, all of you. I was entrusted with this duty, and I will see it through, no matter the cost." Seraphine lowered her gaze, a mix of sadness and admiration flickering in her eyes. "Then I will go with you. If you fall, Aldric, the king's secret must not fall into enemy hands. I will carry it myself if I must." Aldric shook his head. "No, Seraphine. Your place is here within the walls of the castle. Should I fail, you must be the one to protect the king's final command." Reluctantly, Seraphine agreed, and with a last glance, she pressed a small vial into his hand. "Take this. It is a rare blend of herbs. It will grant you strength when you have none left. Use it sparingly, for it cannot be replaced." Aldric took the vial, his fingers brushing hers in a brief moment of understanding. "Thank you, Lady Seraphine. May we meet again in a kingdom at peace." With that, he left her and prepared for the journey north. He dressed in the simplest armor he could find, discarding any insignia that might betray his allegiance. His face, hardened by years of service, bore a grim determination as he slipped from the castle under the veil of dawn. The journey to the north was long and treacherous, filled with rocky terrain and dense forests that seemed to stretch endlessly. At every turn, Aldric was cautious, aware that enemies could be lurking in the shadows. By night, he slept lightly, his hand always on the hilt of his dagger, and by day, he kept to hidden paths, avoiding the well-traveled roads. As he neared the northern territories, he saw the signs of rebellion clearly, villages flying banners of defiance, watchful eyes following him from windows, and soldiers bearing the crest of the exiled duke who sought to take the throne by force. Aldric knew he was entering hostile territory, yet his resolve did not waver. He had made an oath to protect the king's final secret, and no force, however powerful, would make him break it. Finally, he reached the heart of the rebel encampment, a fortified village nestled deep within the forest. Guards patrolled the walls, and the air was thick with the smell of campfires and the murmur of voices. Aldric kept to the shadows, watching the rebels and observing their numbers. They were many, more than he had expected, and their resolve was evident in the hard lines of their faces and the way they held their weapons with a confidence born of purpose. As night fell, Aldric slipped into the encampment, moving like a shadow among the tents. He needed to reach the heart of the rebel forces and confront their leader, the exiled duke who had stirred this insurrection. His plan was simple: to confront the duke, to reveal that he alone held the knowledge that could grant legitimacy to their cause or bring it to ruin. And in doing so, perhaps he could force the duke to parley, to negotiate for peace. But as he neared the central tent, 2 guards spotted him. "Halt! Who goes there?" one of them shouted, drawing his sword. Aldric hesitated, realizing that his cover had been compromised. But rather than flee, he straightened, his voice ringing with authority. "Take me to your leader," he declared. "I bear news of the king, news that could change the course of this war." The guards exchanged wary glances before nodding and leading him to the tent. Inside, the duke waited, a tall, proud man with a gaze as cold as the northern winds. He looked Aldric over, a thin smile curling on his lips. "So, the king's shadow has come to visit," the duke said, his voice dripping with disdain. "What secret do you carry that you would dare enter my camp alone?" Aldric met his gaze steadily. "I carry a truth that could tear this kingdom apart," he replied, his tone even. "But know this, I will protect it with my life." The duke's eyes narrowed, studying Aldric with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. "You're a fool to come here alone, Aldric. Did you think I would simply let you walk away, with the king's final words on your lips?" Aldric smiled, a grim determination in his expression. "I did not come to walk away, but to deliver a warning. You can wage your war, and you may even take the throne. But know that if you do, this kingdom will be built on lies and blood. The king's secret will remain hidden, beyond your reach, until my dying breath." The duke's smile faded, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "And if I were to take it by force?" Aldric's hand went to the small vial Seraphine had given him. "Then come and take it," he challenged, knowing that the vial's contents would grant him the strength to face any fate, be it death or victory. With a roar, the duke signaled his guards to attack. Aldric's hand flew to his dagger, and he fought with a fierce, unyielding resolve. Each movement was swift and precise, every strike born of desperation and purpose. He was no longer just a shadow. He was a storm, relentless in his defense of the king's final command. The battle raged until only Aldric and the duke remained standing, their breaths heavy, their weapons slick with blood. For a moment, they stood in silence, their gazes locked, each man measuring the other. Finally, the duke's sword fell to the ground, and he staggered back, defeated. You would give your life to protect a dying king's last request." Aldric straightened, his face grim. "It is more than a request, it is the soul of this kingdom. And so long as I draw breath, it will remain safe." With that, he turned, leaving the duke to his shame and defeat. He had won this battle, but Aldric knew the war was far from over. The rebellion would not end here, and the king's secret remained a dangerous weight he bore alone. As Aldric disappeared into the shadows, he knew he was marked, an enemy of the rebellion, and a target for every traitor in the kingdom. But he would guard the king's last secret, no matter the cost. Yet the final battle awaited him, one that would test the very limits of loyalty, sacrifice, and honor. As Aldric returned to the kingdom, the journey back felt heavier with each step, as if shadows clung to him like the weight of his oath. The Duke's rebellion had been subdued, but not defeated, and Aldric knew that his presence alone would not quell the rising storm. His mission, to safeguard the king's secret, had demanded sacrifice, but he now saw that the cost would be higher than he had imagined. As he passed through the village at the foot of the castle, the people looked at him with expressions mixed with fear and respect. Whispers followed him, stories of his battles in the north growing into legends. But not all the whispers were kind. Rumors had spread, some claiming that he sought the throne for himself, that his loyalty to the king was a cover for his own ambitions. Aldric's heart grew colder, realizing how deeply the seeds of doubt had taken root. Entering the castle, he was met with wary eyes from knights he had once called brothers. A council had been called, led by the king's chancellor and many of the noble houses. The throne room, usually quiet with reverence, now buzzed with tension. As Aldric stepped in, the council members fell silent, their gazes fixed upon him with skepticism. The chancellor, a thin, severe man with silver hair, narrowed his eyes at Aldric. "Sir Aldric, the king's shadow returns at last," he said, his tone laced with suspicion. "But with him, I fear, he brings rumors of dark intentions." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and Aldric felt the weight of their judgment pressing upon him. He kept his expression calm, his gaze unwavering. "I have returned, Chancellor, as a servant to the crown and protector of this realm," Aldric replied, his voice steady. "The rebellion in the north is a spark, a warning of the dangers we face should the king's wishes be ignored. I hold a truth that must be kept hidden for the safety of the kingdom." The chancellor's gaze was unyielding, his face a mask of indifference. "And what truth is that, Aldric? You carry secrets like a shadow in the night, and yet you ask us to trust you without question. The king is weak, his days numbered. When he dies, this kingdom will be in chaos unless we act now." Aldric's hand went to his side, where the sealed letter containing the king's final command lay hidden. "The king's last wish must be honored," he said, his voice growing sharper. "He trusted me with this knowledge, knowing that revealing it could destroy all he has built. I ask you to trust in his wisdom." But the chancellor shook his head, his gaze dark and unyielding. "Your loyalty is commendable, Aldric, but loyalty alone cannot rule a kingdom. We cannot live in the shadow of secrets." At that moment, Sir Garrett's allies among the nobles stepped forward, their faces twisted with disdain. One of them, Lord Beric, spoke with a sneer. "How convenient that you hold the king's last secret, Aldric. And what stops you from using it to take power for yourself?" Aldric clenched his fists, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. He knew that nothing he could say would sway those who had already made up their minds. The council had become a court of accusations, and he was the one standing trial. "If I desired power, I would not have fought to protect the king's life and legacy," Aldric replied, his voice filled with steel. "I ask only for the chance to fulfill my duty, as the king commanded." But even as he spoke, Aldric saw the futility in his words. The council, once filled with noble intent, had been poisoned by ambition and fear. And he, the one who carried the king's final trust, was now the target of their wrath. Then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke up, quiet but resolute. Lady Seraphine stepped forward, her gaze fierce as she faced the council. "Aldric has served the crown with unwavering loyalty. I have seen his sacrifices, his devotion. If you doubt his intentions, then you doubt the king himself." A silence fell over the room, and for a brief moment, Aldric felt a flicker of hope. But the chancellor's gaze remained cold. "Loyalty, Lady Seraphine, does not grant immunity. If Aldric truly holds the king's final wish, then let him reveal it before the council. If his intentions are pure, then he should have nothing to hide. The demand hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Aldric looked to Seraphine, whose face was set in a mask of defiance, and then to the Chancellor, whose gaze remained icy. He knew that revealing the secret would bring ruin upon the kingdom, yet to refuse would only deepen their suspicion. A choice lay before him, a choice between his oath and the kingdom he had sworn to protect. He knew that whatever he decided, it would change the fate of the realm forever. As the sun began to set, Aldric felt the weight of his duty more than ever. His heart raced as he made his way to the king's chamber, a solitary figure in the dim corridors of the castle. The council awaited his decision, but he could not act without first seeing the king one last time. Entering the chamber, he found the king lying upon his bed, his frail form barely a shadow of the man he once was. The king's eyes fluttered open as Aldric approached, and a faint smile played on his lips. "Aldric, my faithful shadow," he murmured, his voice a mere whisper. Aldric knelt by his side, the weight of his burden pressing down upon him. "My liege, the council demands that I reveal your final command. They fear I seek power for myself." The king's gaze grew distant, his eyes clouded with sorrow. "I knew this day would come, Aldric. A day when loyalty and ambition would clash. But remember this, power is fleeting, while honor endures. If they would force you to reveal the truth, let it be known only at the moment of my death." Aldric felt a pang of grief, yet his resolve remained unbroken. "Then I shall guard it until your final breath, my king. I will not betray your trust." The king nodded, his hand reaching out to clasp Aldric's. "Thank you, Aldric. You have served with more devotion than any knight, more loyalty than any brother. Whatever fate befalls this kingdom, know that I am grateful for your sacrifice." As the king's eyes closed, Aldric knew that his time was running out. He rose, leaving the chamber with a heart heavy yet determined. The council awaited him, and with the king's last wish etched in his mind, he would see this through to the end. When the king's death was announced, the castle plunged into mourning. Bells tolled throughout the land, and grief settled like a shroud over the realm. But within the council chamber, the nobles awaited Aldric, their faces expectant, some with sympathy, others with suspicion. Aldric stood before them, his gaze calm, his voice steady as he prepared to speak. "The king is gone, and with him, the weight of his final wish. He entrusted me with a truth that I now release upon his command." The room fell silent, every eye upon him as he unsealed the letter bearing the king's last request. The words within were simple, yet they carried the weight of ages. Aldric read them aloud, his voice clear and unwavering. "To my loyal subjects," the king had written, "know that I have kept a secret, one that would threaten the peace of this kingdom. My true heir is not one of blood, but of choice. I have chosen Aldric, my faithful shadow, to guide the kingdom in my stead, for he alone possesses the honor to rule without ambition." A shocked silence followed, broken only by murmurs of disbelief. The council looked at Aldric with new eyes, some filled with outrage, others with awe. Aldric lowered the letter, his expression resolute. "I do not desire the throne," he declared, "but I will honor the king's last wish. I will serve the kingdom, not as king, but as guardian, until the true heir can be found." The chancellor rose, his face pale yet understanding. "Then let us honor the king's wish. Aldric shall serve as guardian, protector of the realm." And so it was that Aldric, the man known as the king's shadow, became the keeper of a kingdom, bound by duty and honor alone. The rebellion in the north faded, and peace settled once more upon the land. Yet the people would forever remember the shadow who had protected their realm, a man of no ambition, yet bound by the purest loyalty. Years passed, and Aldric, now gray-haired and weary from his trials, often found himself alone by the edge of the kingdom's cliffs, gazing out over the vast, rolling hills where he had once fought for peace and honor. Though the weight of the king's secret had faded with time, the choices he had made, the battles he had fought in the name of loyalty, left marks upon his soul that no amount of solitude could erase. One autumn evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Aldric felt the familiar ache of memory. He remembered the king's final words, the solemn promise that had bound him to a path of sacrifice. For all the peace he had preserved, the cost had been great, a life lived in the shadow, without the simple joys or companionship of others. Yet he held no regret. In his heart, he knew that true honor lay not in the throne, but in the sacrifices made to protect it. Standing there, Aldric pondered his own legacy. Perhaps somewhere, others faced choices as grave as his own had been. He wondered what price they would be willing to pay, and what sacrifices they, too, would make in the name of loyalty and love. As he turned to leave, his figure blending into the twilight, his tale became a legend, whispered by those who sought courage and wisdom in the shadows, by all who still wrestled with the weight of their own oaths.